Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Sainato with Real Progressives. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a journalist that writes most often for the New York Observer. You can also find my articles in The Hill, Counterpunch, Truth Out, and several other different outlets. Tonight, I want to talk about a Huffington Post article that was published this past Saturday. I am surprised that something like this didn't come out even sooner, given the Russian hysteria. But this article happened to claim, based mostly on speculation and a few anecdotes from people in the Bernie Sanders groups, that Russian trolls infiltrated Bernie Sanders groups during the primaries and the 2016 general election to divide the left, spread resentment to Hillary Clinton. So this article managed to smear Bernie Sanders supporters. Oh, we're so gullible, we fell for this fake news. That was the narrative they tried to propagate. And they also tried to reduce criticisms of Hillary Clinton on the left in the meantime, and elevate this hysteria about Russia and how sinister Russia is. It's this mysterious foe attacking us, and propagating this fake news narrative that started with a Washington Post article that was widely debunked. And in November, they interviewed an organization called Prop or Not that listed several different media outlets, many of which were perfectly legitimate media outlets, and they labeled them as Russian propaganda. They didn't cite their methods, and Washington Post even added a retracting statement that they don't agree with what Prop or Not has to say. Yet they gave them a platform in one of the largest newspapers, if not the largest newspaper in the country, to propagate their own propaganda. So Huffington Post first titled the article, "Russian Trolls Fooled Sanders Voters with Anti-Clinton Fake News." And I'm sure right off the bat they got backlash from Bernie Sanders supporters. The title was later changed, toned down, to "Bernie Sanders Campaign Faced a Fake News Tsunami. Where did it come from?" And Raw Story picked this article up and kept the Russian troll headline. I've seen it in Bill Moyer's. I'm sure a lot of different outlets that felt the need to propagate this narrative, further propagating the Russian hysteria and adding a little bit of a smear campaign against Bernie Sanders supporters. What establishment partisan isn't going to enjoy reading that? So, like I said, they relied on a few people they interviewed from these Bernie Sanders groups. One of which, was Aletta Pierce, who she was previously interviewed, or she was interviewed after this article, and she's posted on her Facebook that she tried to get her quotes removed from the article. She didn't agree with the narrative that was propagated and how the quotes were taken out of context. The inference that these were Russian trolls putting fake news into Bernie Sanders groups was based on the fact that one of the people they interviewed traced the servers to these fake news websites to Macedonia, Eastern Europe, Panama. But for anyone who has had any experience in creating websites, and even, I thought this was common knowledge, but hosting website servers abroad, often in third world countries, cuts the cost of running a website substantially. So that's why you have fake news websites you might see are based in Macedonia or whatever. And what the article didn't cite is in December 2016, NBC News, several other outlets, they published a story. They interviewed a teen in Macedonia who earned $60,000 last year by running a fake news website. So they didn't even address that maybe it's the profit motive. Maybe this was just, people trying to make money, because they cited that not only were the articles, some of them were fake news, some of them were real news. They just happened to poach articles from other outlets, most notably alternative media outlets and smaller media outlets, because outlets like NBC News or New York Times, they have safeguards put in place where if their copyright is infringed upon, they can get that taken down. Smaller media websites, don't have that luxury. So you would have these fake news websites steal those articles and then republish them on their own and generate that free ad revenue. There was a study done in December 2016 by an economist from Stanford University and one from New York University, and they set out to figure out, if fake news was the issue everyone was pretending that it was, and did it impact the election. They found out that it didn't. They did find out that there was more fake news criticizing Hillary Clinton than criticizing Donald Trump, but it existed on both sides of the political spectrums, and it was spread and shared and widely believed by Clinton supporters, Trump supporters, Bernie supporters, you name it. So it's not politically isolated to one group, as this article framed it in a way that Bernie Sanders supporters were the most targeted and the most susceptible to this fake news tsunami, they called it, because they had to dramatize the quantity of this fake news, because they had no way of actually doing that. Based on an account from though no computer forensics work conducted, they didn't have a cybersecurity firm investigating. So, this could be Russian trolls, or it looked like it was Russian trolls. Just because they found some fake profiles of people in Eastern Europe, they assumed, this must be a Russian propaganda operation. And the article was established and elevated just based on this pure speculation. On the Real Progressives website, I posted the Huffington Post article, and I published a retort to that article, and I outlined a lot of the things that's wrong with that article for the Observer that came out this morning. Another thing the article really didn't address, they slightly mentioned it, but they did so in a way that dismissed it entirely. The Clinton Super PAC, Correct the Record, they spent at least $1 million hiring internet trolls to infiltrate Bernie Sanders groups and social media websites to correct any criticisms of Hillary Clinton. And if you were a Bernie Sanders supporter in the Democratic primary, you often were, faced with some of these trolls, a lot of these fake profiles. There was a case during the Democratic primaries where a lot of the Bernie Sanders groups were shut down, and there's a lot of speculation as to what that was. Some people said that Correct the Record trolls infiltrated the groups and spammed it with porn and then reported it to get them shut down. Facebook, came out with the excuse that those Bernie groups that all simultaneously were shut down. Mysteriously, that was some sort of bug in Facebook, which is more than likely bullshit. But that's what Bernie Sanders supporters were really dealing with, especially in those groups. And given the media blackout, those Bernie Sanders groups and Bernie Sanders supporters on social media, it was really those were really center places for the online community to spread Bernie Sanders news. And actually discuss his policies that really weren't getting any attention, or if they were, they were getting attacked from elitist centrist unfairly, disproportionately. The article in Huffington Post cited an example of a Facebook profile named Isaac Mitov, as though the evidence of a fake profile with the last name of a Bulgarian origin was evidence of a Russian disinformation campaign. Most likely, the simplest explanation for what this article was discussing is that there was someone in Bulgaria or someone in Eastern Europe creating Facebook profiles that were fake to share their own fake news, to not to create this whole propaganda disinformation campaign, but to make easy money, to make quick money. Administrators for most of the Bernie Sanders groups did a good job of cleaning that out. And now you go on the Bernie Sanders groups, there's not that's not really a problem anymore. Another thing I wanted to talk about, which this has to do a little bit with how the media has been reacting to this whole Russian hysteria and this Trump resistance, is last night. Everyone knows that MSNBC Rachel Maddow, sensationalized and touted that she had this huge story, this huge Trump tax return story. She finally received Trump's tax returns. We were finally going to be able to see them. That she had a countdown clock. She elevated this as much as possible, and it turned out to be a complete dud. She wound up helping Donald Trump. She showed what was released was one page, a 2005 tax return that showed that he paid relatively a fair amount of taxes. What this does is it did bring a light into the fact and the huge scandal that Donald Trump still has not released his tax return. We've seen, I believe, a 1995 tax return and the 2005 tax return, and that's about it. But what this story did, other than dupe a lot of people into giving Rachel Maddow huge ratings and giving MSNBC another reason to pay her $30,000 a day to spout, the establishment propaganda, it gives Trump the ability and the benefit to have arguments that he still hasn't released his tax returns. To people now have to amend that argument to say, oh, you really give us the rest of them, and it sheds doubt, and it provides fodder to his supporters that, oh, he paid taxes that 1 year, so who cares about the rest? Rachel Maddow did a great disservice yesterday, not only to actual journalists yesterday, but she did it to the whole resistance against Trump, because that nothing could have helped him more than helping that story, especially with the whole Russian hysteria that's been going on, and his unfavorable ratings continuing to drop. As you remember from the Democratic primaries, this is the same Rachel Maddow who not only premiered commercials from Clinton super PACs, she on at least one occasion interviewed the director of a advertisement from Clinton super PACs. You would think this is unethical for a journalist to do, to propagate and elevate and tout advertisements from an actual super PAC. And she did this during the primaries too. She did it during the general election, but this was in the primaries, which is even more concerning. And she interviewed Debbie Wasserman Schultz after the Nevada Democratic Party convention, where Wasserman Schultz, touted the chair throwing myth from the Nevada Democratic Party convention, and attacks Bernie Sanders supporters, overtly violating the DNC charter that binds her to neutrality by doing that. And Rachel Maddow gave her that platform. Maddow also, pushed for Bernie Sanders to drop out before he did. And MSNBC and Maddow, are one of those corporate media outlets that provided Donald Trump with nearly $2 billion in free media coverage. As was demonstrated from a leaked memo from WikiLeaks from April 2015, the plan from the Clinton campaign and the DNC was to elevate Pied Piper candidates, Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and Ted Cruz, to provide Hillary Clinton with a weak general election opponent. And they found that in Donald Trump. They obsessed over him endlessly, nonstop. He received nearly $2 billion in free coverage. The next person, Hillary Clinton, received around $700 million in free coverage. Bernie received less than half of that, I believe around $300 million. And that's ridiculous, given how close the Democratic primaries were and how big of a field of Republican field was. They really picked Donald Trump out of that Republican field and made him the spokesperson of the Republican Party. And they created a monster that they couldn't control. This is the resistance we're stuck with. After the Hillary Clinton embarrassingly lost to Donald Trump, Rachel Maddow tweeted, another propaganda tweet. She criticized not only Jill Stein, but Gary Johnson, and blamed them, third-party voters, specifically for why Hillary Clinton lost. She claimed, she had a thing like if all of Jill Stein's supporters and half of Gary Johnson's supporters voted for Hillary Clinton in Florida, she could have won Florida, as though, first of all, Gary Johnson voters or Jill Stein voters would vote for Hillary Clinton anyways. Especially Gary Johnson, who is a former Republican and a libertarian candidate. Also, she's completely missing the point that Obama won Florida in 2012. So, there's no analysis or introspection. Why did Obama's voters switch over to Trump or third party or didn't vote at all? A lot of, that wasn't reported on. Romney got more votes than Trump did in 2012. That wasn't reported on. 90 million people didn't vote in the 2016 election because we had two of the most unpopular presidential candidates, in modern history. That wasn't reported on. What was reported on is what preserves and helps reboot the establishment. And that's what Maddow did. That's what Maddow has been doing. And that's the kind of journalist that Maddow is and what MSNBC, is more and more becoming. After the November 2016 election, they've hired, I believe, two people from Fox News, and I think they're in talks to hire Gretchen Carlson if they haven't already from Fox News. So they're just moving more and more to the center, and they're picking off the more centrist Republicans from Fox News and other outlets, and they're just becoming this one giant centrist bubble. And another thing that Rachel Maddow did in January, before Obama left office, CNN reported that he deployed thousands of United States troops to supplement NATO forces in Poland on the Russian border as a sign of aggression and force toward Russia. This was the largest deployment of U.S. troops on the Russian border since the Cold War. And Rachel Maddow has been one of the leading voices, along with her colleague at MSNBC, Joy Reid, to lead this Russian hysteria and this Russian anti-Russian propaganda. She said, and quote, and here's the question, is the new president going to take those troops out? After all the speculation, after all the worry, we're all about to find out if Russia maybe has something on the new president. So she was basically inferring that the Trump dossier that BuzzFeed published, she was inferring that was true, and that whether or not Trump took these troops off the border, that was a sign of that this dossier was true. That's what he was going to do. And Trump hasn't done that. Trump, if anything, has continued to escalate tensions with Russia. The sanctions have been kept in place. And last week, an announcement that really was swept under the rug. I have an article coming out tomorrow. I interviewed former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who created a coalition in Congress to oppose the Iraq War, and actually filed impeachment resolutions against Dick Cheney and George W. Bush while he was in Congress for misleading the United States into the Iraq War. And what we discussed is that Quietly, Trump has boosted boots on the ground in Syria. About 400 to 500 Marines on top of the already 400 to 500 special forces that have been on the ground in Syria. He's increasing that all under the pretenses of fighting ISIS. He said during the presidential campaign he believes that the United States will need 20 to 30,000 boots on the ground to fight ISIS in Syria. So what we're seeing that's not getting much reporting on is that he's starting to slowly put troops into Syria unconstitutionally. The Congress hasn't approved this war. We weren't invited to be there. It's more of the same foreign policy disastrous intervention. So I have more on that, and I also talk about Tulsi Gabbard stopped the Arming Terrorist Act that Rand Paul introduced into the Senate last week. This bill has bipartisan support. I would really like to see Bernie Sanders support this bill. He hasn't said anything about it, and because he's been his interviews have been focused on mainstream media reporters, no one's asked him about it, and I doubt anyone will. So I'll be discussing that more and more. I'm waiting to hear back from Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka on their thoughts. I know Baraka started tweeting about it, on how no one is talking about this war in Syria that the United States is getting pulled into more and more. And I believe this week marks 6 years since the beginning of that conflict in Syria. And one more thing before we go, I wanted to talk about just quickly, I don't know if I'll have time to put up the post, but a few hours ago, Tom Perez introduced his list of transition advisors for the DNC. It included one Bernie Sanders surrogate, Pramila Jayapal, and the others are all Clinton surrogates, establishment hacks. The co-chair of it, let me find her name. The co-chair of it was actually hired by Hillary Clinton to pick out her White House staff. But now that Hillary Clinton lost, Tom Perez picked her to pick out all the DNC staff who have already been stacked with Clinton loyalists. So this whole party unity, if you've been duped by it, which most likely if you're watching this, you already know, it's complete bullshit. The Democratic Party has made no effort whatsoever to court progressives. They've made no concessions to progressives. They've really discussed no policies. They focused on this Russian hysteria because it is a safe way to manufacture unity in the party among voters and their wealthy donors without alienating their voters or their wealthy donors by taking a bold progressive stance. You've seen this even with the whole focus on the Obamacare GOP repeal. A lot of Bernie people have been saying this is why we need single payer health. People are saying 10 to 14 to 24 million people are going to get booted off of health insurance through this Obamacare repeal, but under Obamacare and all the flaws that were in it, because it was stripped and manufactured and developed to benefit and help the insurance companies, that nearly 30 million people were off health insurance. So what we really should be working to as an actual Democratic Party is towards single payer health care, but we don't. We're not making any ground on that. And my last thing is tonight at 9:30, there is a Draft Bernie conference call. Josh Fox is leading that call. If you go to Draft Bernie's Twitter, you'll be able to find that and get in touch with that call. And if you haven't, go on that website, draftburning.org, and sign the petition. The more people that sign that petition, the more people that get involved with that movement, the stronger it will be, because we're not seeing anything from the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders said a few days ago in an interview that some people in the Democratic Party they want to preserve the status quo, and what he referred to as the sinking Titanic, and they don't care as long as they have first class seats. Well, I would go more than that and say it's not just some of people in the Democratic Party. It is the Democratic Party. The whole establishment, the whole leadership, they don't want to change. They don't want to adopt progressive reforms. They don't want to adopt, more leftist, economic, populist message or proposals. They want to, further embolden their corporate donors and continue, fundraising and focusing on things that benefit themselves, their corporate donors, their wealthy donors, and that class, that elitist class. They don't care about the voters. They don't care about winning. They'd rather just maintain their own political power and privilege. So I'm going to leave it at that tonight. I'll be back next week. Most likely have a guest. I wasn't on last week because I'm still recovering from a sickness, but this is Michael Sainato with Real Progressives. Until next time.